Canada exports more than $413 billion worth of goods to the United States every year. Nearly 3/4 of everything Canada sells goes to one country. One market, one buyer. That kind of dependence doesn't look dangerous until the buyer decides to squeeze. On February 1st, 2025, that's exactly what happened. A 25% tariff was imposed overnight. No warning, no negotiation, just a signature. Factories slowed almost immediately, orders were canceled, jobs vanished, and this wasn't an abstract economic shock. Within weeks, 82% of Canadians felt the impact directly, through higher grocery bills, rising fuel costs, and mortgage pressure. Donald Trump called it an emergency. He said the tariffs were about fentanyl, border security, and protecting American lives. But when the details came into focus, something didn't add up. This didn't look like a crisis response. It looked planned. It looked like leverage. But the trap didn't start with the tariff. It began decades earlier. By the 2010s, Canada had built one of the most lopsided trade relationships in the world. 75% of its exports flowed to the United States. Nearly all of its energy exports had a single customer: oil, gas, cars, lumber, agriculture. Everything moved south. And when a country depends on one buyer at that scale, it doesn't control the terms of trade. The buyer does. Canadian leaders warned about this for years. Economists flagged the risk. But the geography was easy, the profits were strong, and the downside felt theoretical. That complacency carried through until 2018, when Trump replaced NAFTA with USMCA. Most attention went to what changed in the agreement. What mattered more was what was added: a mandatory review clause with a hard deadline in 2026. From that moment on, trade stability became conditional. Canada's dependency had quietly turned into a negotiating weapon, and when the tariffs landed in early 2025, Canada walked straight into the trap. The official justification was fentanyl, but US. Border data showed that only 43 pounds of fentanyl had been seized at the Canadian border in the previous year, a fraction compared to flows through the southern border. Canada still acted. It increased border funding, appointed a fentanyl czar, and expanded joint enforcement operations. None of it mattered, because this was never about drugs. This was about leverage. With the 2026 USMCA review approaching, the tariffs achieved one strategic objective perfectly. They weakened Canada before it ever reached the negotiating table. Leverage first. But the consequences weren't just on paper. They hit Canadians' wallets and jobs hard. The economic damage followed quickly. Canada slid toward recession territory, with forecasts warning of a GDP shock rivaling anything outside the COVID crash. Job losses mounted, with up to 150,000 positions at risk, and youth unemployment surging as hiring froze. Manufacturing confidence collapsed. The auto sector absorbed the hardest hit. Modern vehicles rely on parts that cross the US-Canada border multiple times before final assembly. A 25% tariff applied on every crossing meant costs stacked rapidly, slowing production and threatening plant closures. At the same time, the Canadian dollar weakened, making imports more expensive and amplifying pressure on household budgets. Food prices rose, fuel costs climbed. Mortgage stress intensified. All of this damage was triggered by tariffs justified with 43 pounds of fentanyl, yet Canada refused to bow. The fight had only just begun. Canada didn't stay silent. Retaliatory tariffs were announced. Electricity surcharges were threatened. American products were pulled from shelves. But the real shock wasn't economic, it was political. Justin Trudeau was already struggling in the polls, and the trade war broke what remained of his support. His finance minister resigned publicly. The Liberal Party fractured. An election became unavoidable. That's when the story took an unexpected turn. Trump didn't fracture Canada, he unified it. Mark Carney entered the scene, former head of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. With a blunt message, Canada would not fold. Trump, unable to resist, kept attacking from the sidelines. He called Canada weak. He called it dependent. He repeated the 51st state line, and it backfired spectacularly. Pierre Poilievre's massive polling lead collapsed. Canadians didn't rally around a party, they rallied against Trump. The election became a referendum on sovereignty rather than ideology. But even with this political victory, Canada remained cornered economically. Here's the reality: no amount of nationalism can erase. More than 3/4 of Canadian exports still go to the United States. That dependency doesn't disappear in a year, or even a decade. Carney is buying time, pushing diversification, breaking internal trade barriers, and building alternatives. But the clock is ticking. The 2026 USMCA review is approaching fast. Canada will arrive already wounded. That was always the point. Trump didn't just hit Canada's economy, he hit its negotiating position. And if the United States can do this to Canada, its closest ally, its largest trading partner, its neighbor, then no country is immune. The rules are changing. The world is adjusting. And when that negotiation arrives, Canada will face a choice it spent decades avoiding: bend or pay the price. This is bigger than Canada. The global stakes are real. That decision won't just define Canada's future, it will define the next era of global trade. If the United States can corner its closest ally with leverage and tariffs, the message is clear: no country, no trade deal, and no alliance is untouchable. Canada fought back politically and socially, but economically it remains vulnerable. The world is watching, and countries that rely heavily on U.S. trade are quietly recalculating their strategies. The stakes are high, the precedent has been set, and the next era of global commerce will be shaped by the choices made at the USMCA negotiation table. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Share your opinion about Canada's trade situation and the global impact of America's strategy. Your engagement helps others stay informed, so hit those buttons and spread the word.